I never thought a single customer could change everything about my small diner, but that's exactly what happened on a cold Tuesday morning in November. My name is Sarah, and I've been running Sarah's Corner Diner for the past 8 years in downtown Portland. It's nothing fancy, just red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and the smell of bacon grease that never quite leaves the air. But it was mine, and I was proud of every scratch on those old tables. That morning started like any other. The usual crowd filtered in. Construction workers grabbing coffee before their shift, elderly Mr. Peterson with his daily newspaper and black coffee, and Jenny, the nurse from the hospital across the street, always ordering the same blueberry pancakes. I knew everyone's order by heart, their stories, their struggles. That's what I loved about this place. It wasn't just a diner, it was a community. Then he walked in. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him. Mid-40s, maybe 50, with graying hair that looked like it hadn't seen a proper barber in months. His clothes told a story of hard times: faded jeans with patches on the knees, a worn-out flannel shirt that had seen better days, and boots that were so scuffed I couldn't tell what color they used to be. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were sharp, observant, taking in every detail of my little diner like he was memorizing it. He chose the corner booth, the one with the wobbly table that I kept meaning to fix. I grabbed my coffee pot and walked over, putting on my best customer service smile. "Good morning. Coffee to start." He looked up at me, and for a moment I felt like he was seeing right through me. "Please. Black, no sugar." His voice was quiet but had a quality to it that made me listen carefully. As I poured his coffee, I noticed his hands. They were rough, calloused, but there was something else. His fingernails were clean, too clean for someone who looked like he worked construction or manual labor. I've learned to read people in this business, and something about this man didn't quite add up. "Menu," I offered, sliding the laminated sheet across the table. He barely glanced at it. "What do you recommend?" "Depends on what you're in the mood for. The hash browns are crispy, the eggs are fresh from Murphy's farm just outside town, and I make a mean apple pie." He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. "Surprise me." I decided on the house special: 2 eggs over easy, crispy bacon, hash browns, and wheat toast. Nothing fancy, but made with care. As I cooked, I found myself glancing over at him. He sat quietly, sipping his coffee, occasionally scribbling something in a small, worn notebook. When other customers came in, he watched them with the same intense attention he'd given the diner itself. When I brought his plate over, he thanked me genuinely, not the automatic response most people give. He ate slowly, deliberately, like he was savoring every bite. About halfway through his meal, he looked up at me. "How long have you owned this place?" 8 years, I replied, refilling his coffee. "Bought it from the previous owner when she retired. It's good food. Honest food." He paused, then added, "That's rare these days." Something in his tone made me linger by his table. "You're not from around here?" "No," he said simply. "Just passing through." But he didn't feel like someone just passing through. There was something purposeful about the way he observed everything, the way he asked questions. When the morning rush hit, I got busy with other customers, but I was aware of him the entire time. He stayed for almost 2 hours, long after he'd finished eating, just watching, listening, writing in that little notebook of his. When he finally asked for his check, I almost felt disappointed. The total came to $8.50. He reached into his wallet, an old leather thing that looked like it might fall apart, and pulled out a $10 bill. But as he handed it to me, I caught a glimpse of what was inside that wallet. There had to be several $100 bills in there, maybe more. "Keep the change," he said, standing up. As he walked toward the door, I called after him. "Will we see you again?" He paused at the door, looking back with that enigmatic smile. "Maybe." After he left, I found myself thinking about him for the rest of the day. There was something about the whole encounter that felt significant, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. It wasn't until I was closing up that night that I realized what had been bothering me. For someone who looked like he was down on his luck, he carried himself with a confidence that didn't match his appearance. And those $100 bills in his worn-out wallet. That was a contradiction I couldn't shake. I had no idea that this mysterious stranger would return the next day, and the day after that, gradually becoming part of the fabric of my little diner. And I certainly had no idea that his presence would lead to the most surprising revelation of my life. He came back the next morning at exactly 8:15 a.m. I found myself watching for him, though I tried to tell myself it was just curiosity. This time he ordered coffee and asked me to surprise him again with breakfast. I made him French toast with fresh strawberries and a side of crispy bacon. "You're becoming a regular," I said as I set his plate down. "Is that okay?" he asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in the question. Of course. I love regulars. They're what keep places like this alive. Over the following weeks he became just that, a regular. Every morning at 8:15 same corner booth, black coffee and whatever I decided to make him. He never complained about my choices, always cleaned his plate and left exactly $1.50 tip every time. For someone carrying hundreds in cash, it was oddly specific and modest. What struck me most was how he interacted with my other customers. At first they were wary of the scruffy stranger, but gradually he won them over. He remembered details about their lives, asked Mr. Peterson about his grandson's baseball games, inquired about Jenny's night shifts at the hospital, even helped one of the construction workers with some advice about a home repair project. "You know a lot about construction," I commented one morning after overhearing his conversation with Mike, one of my regular contractors. He shrugged. "I've done a lot of different jobs over the years. But it wasn't just construction." I noticed he seemed knowledgeable about everything, from Jenny's medical concerns to Mrs. Hamilton's accounting problems for her small business. When young Tommy, who bussed tables for me part-time, mentioned struggling with his college applications, the stranger spent an entire morning helping him craft his essay. "You're good with people," I observed, refilling his coffee. "People are interesting," he replied simply. "Everyone has a story." His own story, however, remained a mystery. When customers asked about his background, he'd deflect with questions about their lives. He was a master at shifting conversations away from himself. The only clues I had were those observant eyes, his surprising knowledge on various subjects, and that wallet full of cash that seemed at odds with his appearance. 3 weeks into his daily visits, something happened that made me even more curious about him. Mrs. Chin, an elderly woman who came in twice a week, was having trouble with her order. She spoke limited English and I was struggling to understand what she wanted. The stranger got up from his booth and approached our counter. "Excuse me," he said gently, then spoke to Mrs. Chin in what sounded like fluent Mandarin. Her face lit up and they had a brief conversation before he turned to me. She'd like the vegetable omelette, but with no onions and green tea instead of coffee. Mrs. Chin nodded enthusiastically and patted his arm gratefully. "You speak Mandarin?" I asked after Mrs. Chin had taken her seat. "A little," he said modestly, but the conversation I'd overheard sounded far more than a little. As the days passed, I compiled a mental list of things I'd learned about my mysterious regular. He spoke at least 3 languages that I'd overheard: Mandarin, Spanish, and what sounded like Italian. He knew about construction, medicine, accounting, college admissions, and seemed to have traveled extensively based on casual references he made to different cities and countries. Yet he dressed like someone who shopped at thrift stores and never ordered anything more expensive than $10. The contradiction became even more apparent one morning when a well-dressed businessman came in, talking loudly on his phone about some corporate deal. My regular customer listened intently, and I saw him write something in that ever-present notebook. When the businessman left, I asked him about it. "Just interesting to hear how people think about business," he said. "You know much about business?" He was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee slowly. "I've learned a thing or two over the years." There was something in his tone that suggested those thing or two might be more substantial than he was letting on. But before I could ask more, the morning rush started and the moment passed. That afternoon, after the lunch crowd had cleared out, I was wiping down tables when I overheard him on a phone call. He'd stepped outside, but the diner's windows were open and his voice carried. "Yes, the quarterly reports look good," he was saying. "Tell them to proceed with the merger, but I want to see the environmental impact studies first." There was a pause. "No, I'll be back in the office next week. This research is taking longer than expected." Research? Office? Merger? This didn't sound like someone just passing through town. When he came back in, I tried to act casual, but my mind was racing with questions. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just some family business," he said, but he looked uncomfortable, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. That night, as I was closing up, I found myself staring at the corner booth where he sat every morning. Who was this man really? And why was someone who clearly had money and influence spending his days in my little diner, dressed like he was down on his luck. I had no idea that I was about to find out in the most unexpected way possible. It was a Thursday morning, exactly 4 weeks after the stranger first walked into my diner, when everything I thought I knew about him turned upside down. The day started normally enough. He arrived at his usual time, took his usual seat and ordered his usual black coffee. But there was something different about him. He seemed nervous, checking his watch frequently and glancing toward the door every few minutes. "You expecting someone?" I asked while refilling his coffee cup. "In a way," he replied cryptically. Around 10 a.m., when the morning rush had died down and only a few customers remained, 3 people in expensive suits walked through my door. They looked completely out of place in my humble diner, the kind of people who usually frequented upscale restaurants with names I couldn't pronounce. They scanned the room until their eyes landed on my mysterious regular customer. "Mr. Hartwell," the woman in the lead said, approaching his table. "We need to discuss the Portland acquisition immediately." My regular customer, Mr. Hartwell, apparently sighed deeply. "I told you I wasn't to be disturbed unless it was an emergency. Sir, the deadline for the Henderson Group bid is today. Without your signature, we'll lose the deal." I stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot in hand, trying to process what I was hearing. Acquisition? Henderson Group? These were terms I'd heard on business news programs, not conversations that happened in my diner. Mr. Hartwell looked around the diner, his eyes meeting mine briefly, and I saw something like apology in them. "Can we at least sit down? Order some coffee?" The 3 suits looked uncomfortable but took seats in the booth across from him. I approached on autopilot, my mind reeling. "Coffee for everyone?" I managed to ask. The woman looked at me like I was a servant. "We don't have time for—" "Yes, thank you, Sarah," Mr. Hartwell interrupted. "And could you bring some of that apple pie? I've been telling them about your baking." As I prepared their order, I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They were discussing millions of dollars like pocket change, talking about real estate developments, environmental assessments, and employment impacts. And at the center of it all was the man I'd known as a quiet regular who left modest tips and wore threadbare clothes. "The Portland waterfront project alone will create 1,500 jobs," one of the men was saying. "But we need your approval on the final design changes. Have you incorporated the affordable housing component I requested?" Mr. Hartwell asked. "Sir, that will reduce profits by nearly 20%. Then we reduce profits by 20%. The whole point of this development is to benefit the community, not just our bottom line." When I brought their coffee and pie, the woman looked at me dismissively, but Mr. Hartwell smiled warmly. "Sir, this is the best apple pie in Portland. I've been trying to convince my colleagues to expand our corporate catering to include local businesses like this one." The pieces were starting to come together, but I still couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. This man, who ate my simple breakfasts and sat in my wobbly corner booth, was apparently making decisions about millions of dollars and thousands of jobs. After about an hour of intense discussion, during which I caught phrases like board meeting, shareholders, and quarterly projections, the 3 suits finally left. Mr. Hartwell remained in his booth, looking exhausted. I walked over with the coffee pot, my hands slightly shaking. "So, Mr. Hartwell." He looked up at me with those observant eyes that I now realized had been studying more than just my diner all these weeks. "My name is actually Robert Hartwell. And you're, what? Some kind of businessman?" He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "I suppose you could say that. Those people were talking about millions of dollars." They were. I sat down across from him, something I'd never done with a customer before. "Who are you really?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee absently. Finally he looked up. "I'm the CEO of Hartwell Development Group. We're a real estate and investment company. We develop shopping centers, residential communities, office buildings. The Portland waterfront project they mentioned? It's a $200 million development that will reshape the downtown area." My mouth fell open. You're rich." "Very," he admitted quietly. "But you dress like—" I gestured at his worn clothes. "Like someone who's down on his luck?" He smiled sadly. "That's intentional." "But why?" Robert leaned back in the booth, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired. "Sarah, do you know what it's like to never know if people like you for who you are or what you can do for them? To wonder if every smile, every kindness, is genuine or calculated. I shook my head, still trying to process this revelation. I built my company from nothing, he continued. Started with a single rental property when I was 25. Now 30 years later we own developments in 12 states and employ over 3,000 people. But somewhere along the way I lost touch with this. He gestured around the diner. Real people living real lives, not trying to impress me or get something from me. So you pretended to be poor? I wanted to see what it was like to be treated as just another person again. To sit somewhere and not have people recognize my name from business magazines or society pages. The morning rush for lunch was starting and I had to get back to work, but my mind was spinning. As I served other customers, I kept glancing over at Robert, seeing him completely differently now. The confidence I'd noticed made sense. He was used to being in charge. The knowledge about various subjects came from years of business experience. Even the way he helped other customers took on new meaning. This was someone accustomed to solving problems and making things happen. But what I couldn't understand was why he'd chosen my diner, and why he'd kept coming back day after day. That mystery would be solved soon enough, and the answer would shock me more than learning he was a millionaire. After the lunch rush died down, Robert was still sitting in his corner booth, but now he had papers spread across the table and was making phone calls. I could hear fragments of conversations about construction permits, zoning laws, and something called community impact assessments. This was clearly not someone just passing through town. He was working on something specific, something that involved Portland. When he finally hung up from his latest call, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. "Robert," I said, approaching his table. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why my diner? I mean, there are dozens of restaurants in Portland. Why did you choose this place to do whatever it is you're doing?" He gestured for me to sit down, and I noticed he'd organized his papers so I couldn't see what was written on them. "That's a fair question. The honest answer is that I didn't choose your diner randomly." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I've been in Portland for 2 months, Sarah. I've eaten at every restaurant within a 6-block radius of this area. I've talked to dozens of business owners, community leaders, residents. I've been conducting research." "Research for what?" Robert was quiet for a moment, then pulled out one of the papers he'd been hiding. It was a map of downtown Portland with various buildings marked in different colors. My diner was circled in red. "My company has been hired to develop this entire district. 6 city blocks of mixed-use development, retail space, offices, luxury condominiums, a hotel. It's going to transform this part of the city." I stared at the map, trying to understand what he was telling me. "And my diner is right in the middle of it." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're going to tear down my diner." That was the original plan, yes. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. When I first came here, this was just another business acquisition for me. I had a team of analysts who provided demographic data, traffic patterns, property values. On paper, your diner was just an aging building that would be more valuable as part of a larger development." Tears were starting to form in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "So why the charade? Why pretend to be a regular customer?" "Because I learned something important early in my career. Numbers on a spreadsheet don't tell the whole story. Before I make any major development decision, I always spend time in the community, getting to know the people who will be affected." "You were spying on us." "In a way, yes. But Sarah, what I found here." He paused, looking around the diner. "This place isn't just a restaurant. It's the heart of this community." I followed his gaze, seeing my diner through his eyes. Mr. Peterson in his usual spot, reading the paper and occasionally chatting with other customers. Jenny grabbing a quick lunch before her shift. The construction workers who knew they could always get a hot meal and friendly conversation. Tommy, who was saving money for college by working here part-time. Every morning I watched you remember everyone's orders, ask about their families, celebrate their good news and console them during hard times. I saw Mike help Mrs. Chin fix her porch light just because you mentioned she was having trouble with it. I watched Jenny give Tommy advice about college applications. This isn't just a business. It's a community center. But you're still going to tear it down. Robert shook his head slowly. "No, Sarah. I'm not." I looked up at him, confused. "What?" 3 weeks ago, I called my design team and told them to completely revise the development plans. Instead of tearing down existing businesses, we're going to build around them. Your diner will not only stay, it's going to be the centerpiece of the new development. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. The new plan incorporates all the existing businesses that serve the community. Your diner, Peterson's barbershop next door, the small grocery store on the corner. They'll all stay. But we'll upgrade the infrastructure around you, improve parking, add green space. The development will bring more people to the area, which should increase your business. But why? I managed to ask. You said it would reduce your profits. Robert smiled, the same genuine smile I'd seen that first morning. Because I learned something sitting in this corner booth for 4 weeks. Profit isn't the only measure of success. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is preserve what's already working. You changed your entire plan, because of my diner? Because of what your diner represents. Community. Connection. The kind of human interaction that we lose when we tear everything down and start over. I was crying now, tears of relief and gratitude rolling down my cheeks. I thought I was going to lose everything. You're not losing anything, Sarah. In fact, I have a proposal for you. He pulled out another set of papers. These looked like legal documents. What's this? A contract. My company wants to hire Sarah's Corner Diner to provide catering services for all the businesses in the new development. Corporate breakfast meetings, lunch conferences, special events. It would triple your current revenue, and you'd still keep your regular restaurant operation. I looked at the contract, the numbers swimming before my eyes. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of making. There's just one condition, Robert added. My heart sank. What? You have to promise to keep making that apple pie. My board of directors is going to expect it at every meeting. I laughed through my tears, hardly able to believe what was happening. You're serious about all this? Dead serious. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Something that might change how you feel about accepting this offer. The serious tone in his voice made me look up sharply. What? The reason I've been conducting this research personally instead of sending my usual team. The reason I've spent 2 months in Portland instead of 2 weeks. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. This isn't just another development project for me. This is personal. What do you mean, personal? Robert looked around the diner one more time, then back at me. Sarah, what do you know about the previous owner of this building? The woman you bought the diner from 8 years ago. Mrs. Morrison? Not much. He was elderly, wanted to retire. Why? Mrs. Morrison was my grandmother. The words hung in the air between us like a revelation that changed everything I thought I understood about the past month. I stared at Robert, searching his face for some sign that he was joking, but his expression was completely serious. Your grandmother? I whispered. Eleanor Morrison was my father's mother. She ran this diner for 32 years before she sold it to you. My mind raced back to my conversations with Mrs. Morrison 8 years ago. She'd been a sweet woman in her 70s with silver hair and kind eyes. She'd seemed sad to sell but said she was ready to retire and move closer to family. I remembered thinking she was selling the place for much less than it was worth, and when I'd asked her about it, she just smiled and said she wanted to make sure it went to someone who would love it as much as she had. But why didn't you tell me? I asked. Robert ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking older than his 50 years. Because I wasn't sure how I felt about finding you here. When my company first identified this area for development, I had no idea my grandmother's old diner was still operating. I'd lost touch with this part of my family's history. Lost touch. My grandmother and I had a falling out about 15 years ago. I was young, ambitious, building my company. She thought I was becoming too focused on money, losing sight of what really mattered. She said I was forgetting where I came from. Robert's voice grew quiet and I could hear the regret in it. The last time I saw her, she told me that success without compassion was just greed in an expensive suit. I was angry, thought she didn't understand the modern business world. I stopped visiting, stopped calling. When did she pass away? 3 years ago. I found out 2 weeks after the funeral. His voice cracked slightly. I was in Tokyo on business. My assistant didn't think it was important enough to interrupt my meetings. I reached across the table and touched his hand. I'm so sorry, Robert. When I learned that Hartwell Development Group was planning to tear down her diner, I had to come see it for myself. I expected to find some corporate chain restaurant or maybe the building sitting empty. Instead, I found you. And you saw your grandmother in what I was doing? I saw everything she tried to teach me. The importance of community, of knowing your customers' names, of making people feel valued and cared for. Watching you work, seeing how you interacted with everyone who came through that door. It was like seeing her again. Robert pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It was an old black and white picture of a young woman standing in front of my diner, but it looked different, older with a different sign. This was taken in 1962, the year she opened Eleanor's Kitchen. That was the original name. I studied the photograph, recognizing the basic structure of my building but seeing how much it had changed over the decades. She looked so young. She was 25 when she started this place. Same age I was when I started my company. Robert put the phone away and looked around the diner. She told me once that she could measure her success by the number of people who considered this place their second home. Is that why you changed the development plans? Because of your grandmother? Partly. But mostly because of you, Sarah. These past 4 weeks, sitting in this corner booth, I've learned more about business than I did in my first 10 years as CEO. What do you mean? I've been so focused on growth, on profit margins and market share, that I forgot the most important rule of business. Take care of your people and they'll take care of you. Your customers don't just eat here, they're part of your extended family. That's not something you can create with marketing or corporate strategy. That's something you build one relationship at a time, one meal at a time, one conversation at a time. I looked around my diner, seeing it through this new lens. Your grandmother would be proud of what you're doing now. I hope so. I've made a lot of mistakes, Sarah. I've built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but I've lost sight of why I wanted to build it in the first place. And why was that? Robert smiled, and for a moment I could see the young man he must have been when he started his business. To make a difference. To build things that mattered, that improved people's lives. It sounds like you're getting back to that. I'm trying. The Portland development is going to be a model for all our future projects. Instead of displacing existing communities, we're going to strengthen them. We're calling it the Eleanor Morrison Community Development Project. Tears filled my eyes again. You're naming it after your grandmother? With your permission. After all, you're the one carrying on her legacy. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. There's one more thing, Robert said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small wooden box and set it on the table. She left this for whoever took over the diner. I found it in her things after she passed away, with a note that said to give it to the person who made this place a home again. With trembling hands I opened the box. Inside was a simple gold locket, tarnished with age. I opened it and found a tiny photograph of the diner from that 1962 picture, and on the other side an engraving, "Success is measured in smiles, not dollars." Eleanor Morrison, 1962. She wanted you to have it, Robert said softly. As I held the locket, I felt a connection to this woman I'd never really known, but who had somehow paved the way for everything I'd built here. I wish I could have told her how much I loved this place. She knew. Sarah, in her final months, she used to drive by here just to see the customers coming and going. She told the nurse at her assisted living facility that she could tell the diner was in good hands because people were always smiling when they left. 6 months later, I stood in front of Sarah's Corner diner, now officially renamed Eleanor's Corner, in honor of its original owner, watching as the final touches were put on the beautiful new development surrounding us. The diner looked exactly the same, but now it was framed by tree-lined walkways, outdoor seating areas, and modern buildings that somehow managed to complement rather than overshadow the original structure. Robert had kept every promise. The development brought new customers while preserving the sense of community that made the diner special. Mr. Peterson still came for his morning coffee and newspaper, now joined by young professionals who worked in the new office building next door. Jenny still grabbed her blueberry pancakes between shifts, but now she also handled catering orders for the law firm on the second floor of our building. And Robert? He moved his Portland offices into the development and became a regular customer all over again. Though now he wore expensive suits and everyone knew exactly who he was. But he still sat in the same corner booth every morning, still asked me to surprise him with breakfast, and still left exactly the same tip he'd left when he was pretending to be down on his luck. The only difference was that now, when he looked around the diner with those observant eyes, I knew he was seeing what his grandmother had built, what I had preserved, and what we were building together for the future. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary moments. A stranger walks into a diner, orders coffee, and sits in a corner booth. But if you pay attention, really pay attention, you might discover that there are no ordinary moments, just opportunities to change someone's life or to have your own life changed in return. Eleanor Morrison understood that. Robert Hartwell learned it. And I live it every day, one customer at a time, one conversation at a time, one breakfast at a time. After all, success isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the smiles of people who consider your place their second home. To support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.